In July 2025, something shocking jolted the geopolitical world. Japan's new prime minister announced that Tokyo will not back Washington's trade war, but pursue its own independent course. This is not a theoretical shift, it's a bold pivot in the heart of East Asia. According to Bloomberg Asia and Tokyo insiders, Japan's export-focused leaders privately warned that supporting U.S. tariffs would sabotage their own economy. Today on Maple States, we unpack how Japan is rewriting alliances and why the world may never look the same again. Japan has long been viewed as a trusted U.S. ally, diplomatically, militarily, economically. When Sanai Takaichi won the premiership, global observers expected a surge in anti-China rhetoric, tighter U.S. alignment, and renewed defense cooperation. But instead, she reversed the narrative. Her first major address stunned Washington. Japan will refuse to support U.S. tariffs, will not act as a tool of economic pressure, and will more equally engage with China. Why? Because Japan's entire economic model is built on exports. China is its largest trading partner. Any tariff war that harms China also cuts deeply into Japan's own supply chains, profits, and global standing. Over the next 10 minutes, we'll explore how this political shakeup unfolded, the furious reaction from Washington, economic fallout and the shift toward an Asia-centered outlook, the global consequences, alliances, markets, and the dawn of an Eastern alternative. During the campaign, Takaichi was expected to champion a harder line on China, promising to toughen the alliance with the U.S., enhance military readiness, and push back on Beijing's regional influence. But shortly after assuming office, she did the unexpected. She publicly criticized U.S. tariff policy, denouncing it as one of the gravest errors of the 21st century. Washington was caught off guard. Many in the White House believed her victory would reinforce the anti-China front. Instead, it ruptured it. President Donald Trump responded angrily. He called Japan's shift a betrayal of free trade and said his administration would review all agreements with Tokyo. Some statements in U.S. media labeled it a stab in the back from a former ally. In Congress, whispers emerged about reevaluating the U.S.-Japan Defense Treaty. Could Tokyo's pivot threaten the foundation of regional security? Meanwhile, American economic hawks began drafting new sanctions targeting Japanese firms exporting cars and electronics. The alliance that once anchored U.S. policy in Asia was under strain. But in Tokyo, the narrative was different. The shift was framed not as betrayal, but as sovereign realism. According to insider reports, Takaichi convened discreet talks with Japan's giants, Toyota, Sony, Mitsubishi Heavy, and others. The message was clear. The U.S.-China tariff war would devastate Japan's exports. The cost of siding with Washington was projected to outweigh any diplomatic gains. Japan's supply chains are deeply embedded in China. Japanese components are assembled in China, re-exported or shipped back. Tariffs on Chinese goods would hit Japanese firms just as badly. In 2024, Japan's exports to China totaled roughly $124.6 billion US dollars. Japan recorded a record current account surplus of 29.3 trillion yen, $193 billion in 2024, largely thanks to gains in foreign investment returns and export-oriented profits. Recent data show that as U.S. tariffs bite, Japan's exports to the U.S. are declining. In May 2025, exports fell, and the country posted a trade deficit of 637.6 billion yen in that month alone. In April 2025, Japan's overall trade recorded a deficit of 115.8 billion yen due to shrinking imports and export pressures. Meanwhile, exports to China rebounded in October 2024, aided by strong demand for chip-making and machinery equipment. These numbers tell a stark truth. Japan cannot side with a war against its largest trade partner without self-harm. Japanese manufacturers are already uneasy. In March 2025, the Business Sentiment Index slipped into negative territory, largely because of U.S. tariff fears and China's economic slowdown. The logic in Tokyo became, if the U.S. flexes trade muscles indiscriminately, Japan must shield its own economic interests first, even if that means distancing from its traditional ally. For the first time since World War II, Tokyo is no longer following Washington. It's writing its own rules. And this time, the script is being drafted not in Washington, but in Beijing's orbit. Takaichi has repeatedly framed her policy as a Japanese path, not pro-China or anti-West. In her sessions before Parliament, she affirmed that Japan respects the United States, but also respects China, and that it will no longer be a pawn. She challenged old alliances and emphasized Tokyo must now act according to its own strategic interests. Indeed, this pivot has already sparked talk of a regional currency zone or greater financial integration with China and South Korea, a move that could partially sideline the US dollar in intra-Asian trade flows. Surveys conducted by NHK and others indicate that over 60% of Japanese citizens now support Takaichi's diplomatic course, favoring a more independent, Asia-oriented policy over strict alignment with the U.S. Young public discourse even calls her the prime minister of a new generation, someone daring enough to break free from dependency on Washington. Japan, China, and South Korea recently revived economic dialogue after years of dormancy, seeking to bolster regional trade frameworks. Some analysts argue the move could ultimately lead to a South Korea-Japan-China Free Trade Agreement, FTA, or currency settlement mechanisms. Observers at CSIS warn that if Tokyo crosses the U.S. frontier, America's regional strategy could collapse. Japanese politicians and bureaucrats are quietly pushing the narrative of Asia-first economics, asserting that if alliances with the West become constraints, independence is a necessary shift. Trump's next move: issue sanctions on Japanese exporters, cars, electronics, advanced machinery. The purpose: force Tokyo back in line. But Tokyo's markets have held firm. U.S. media and think tanks warn the U.S.-Japan alliance is fracturing. Politico spoke of the possibility of the U.S. reviewing stationing troops in Okinawa. The Guardian reported that internal U.S. strategy discussions have begun about the Asian order unraveling. Japan has responded nonchalantly. Defense officials say no sudden withdrawal will occur, but caution is rising in Washington that Asia may no longer tilt entirely toward the U.S. The yen has strengthened modestly in response to Japan's renewed regional focus. The Chinese yuan also gained ground, while the U.S. dollar weakened in Asia's trading corridors. Japanese bond yields have remained steady despite U.S. anxiety, signaling investor confidence in Tokyo's pivot. The IMF is reportedly examining the implications if Japan-China financial integration deepens, a move that could undercut the U.S. dollar's dominance in global liquidity. In Washington, closed-door talks at the Pentagon and State Department are speculating over whether the U.S. must renegotiate Asia's security architecture. Meanwhile, in Seoul, there's talk of joining a nascent Asian economic corridor if Tokyo and Beijing's integration sees traction. Thus, across capitals, the narrative is shifting. The old U.S.-led framework may no longer fit. In a world where tariffs have replaced the barrel of a gun, Japan has chosen diplomacy over obedience, a sovereignty over subordination. This is not the end of American influence, but it may mark the end of unquestioned loyalty. Alliances are no longer fixed. Where once Tokyo followed Washington, now it walks alongside Beijing. The question is, does the United States adapt or recede? Thank you for watching Maple States. If you value clarity in global shifts, hit subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. The most compelling insight gets pinned each week. We'll see you in the next deep dive.